Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Deal Flow Show. I'm JP Maroney, your host, along with my co-host for this episode, Mr. Paul Nicolini. You seem to be on a lot of episodes.
Oh, I am.
Mr. Paul Nicolini here from Harbor City Capital, and today we have a special guest, and actually, you're our first in-studio guest. So
that's great.
In and amongst all this COVID, as well as having a lot of people from out of town, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio with us, Mr. Brad Truesdell from Tomahawk Robotics. And my little bit of history that I have from Tomahawk Robotics comes from our producer for the Deal Flow Show, Mr. Daniel Penaranda, who went to work for you guys while he was still in college, right?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, he's one of one of the first 10 employees that we had at the company.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I heard lots of good things about the business, and I'm very fascinated by where y'all are going, both with the technology as well as the initiatives and the areas of business, so I can't wait to get into that.
Okay.
If you're watching or listening to this episode of the Deal Flow Show, you can get more episodes and subscribe or follow us for future episodes at thedealflowshow.com. So I know you have not always been with Tomahawk Robotics, so I'd like to back up just a little bit and talk about how you got involved in the business world, what you started doing, where you started out, and then maybe lead up and talk a little bit more about Tomahawk after that.
Sure. So my backstory is native of Florida, where we're located today, and grew up down here, and then went off to college, and then following college into the Navy, and spent 1998 to 2007, so about 9 years in the Navy. During that time, I was a SEAL, and this is what kind of leading into Tomahawk Robotics, had the opportunity to use some of the first robotic systems that were employed by small units, both air and ground. And so had that opportunity, during my time in the military, and then following that, left the military in 2007 following an injury, went to business school, and then subsequently to that, worked at Harris Corporation here in Melbourne, Florida, and then worked there from 2009 to 2017, and then started Tomahawk Robotics in 2018.
If I'd have remembered that you had former Navy SEAL, I probably wouldn't have been saying the things that I said when you came in the door today.
And actually, with working at Harris, didn't you meet a professor at Harvard? Is that how that evolved?
Yeah, so one of my professors, a gentleman by the name of Steve Kaufman, sat on the board of Harris at the time. He was a former CEO of Aero Electronics, and fortunate for me, we struck up a nice relationship during my time at business school. And he's very encouraging of trying out a role at Harris, and he was very nice in helping me facilitate a great entry point. And Steve is certainly knowledgeable about the industry. I went to business school a little bit later in life than most people because of my military service, and also I just frankly wanted to give back. What the same motivations that pushed me into wanting to join the military in the first place. Patriotism, wanting to do something important, impactful for our society. Maybe want to go back to work for the aerospace and defense industry. And Steve, helped me along that path. And so, it turned out to be a great thing, joining Harris, learning a lot about the industry, and frankly, how to run a business. I learned things there that I wouldn't have learned, doing many other jobs, and has, subsequently prepared me well for Tomahawk Robotics.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
When did you get the entrepreneurial itch?
Well, originally, I think, two things that probably go to that point. So number one, my parents owned a business themselves, and so I got to see that, their own, the highs and lows that they dealt with when they started their own business, right? And they started it relatively, late in life, and let's say middle of their career is probably a better descriptor for it. And they built up a good business and good living for themselves. And after school and during the summers, I worked for them. And so I got to see that, both the goods and bads of that. But I got to see how impactful that good management, a good culture could be on their coworkers or their employees' lives, and that's something certainly that I took away from that experience. So that that's certainly that kind of formative experience that I lived through. But also, I think that as you progress through your own careers, right, you learn things, as I talked about, both during my military time, my education, and at Harris. And at some point, you want to take a swing yourself, right? And I think that's, I got to that point in life, and I was ready to, I felt prepared, and I felt like I could do something more impactful on my own.
When you go from having the resources of a Harris behind you to running a small team, your own SEAL team, so to speak, in an entrepreneurial effort, how did you make the transition to that, knowing that you don't have the big backing behind you? It's up to you. You got to eat what you kill and things like that.
So I think that so there's a resource element, and then I'll call that the the mindset and the ability to trust yourself and operate on your own. So that certainly came from the confidence I gained during the military that I would have that ability, right? Confidence in yourself to make smart decisions, or make mostly smart decisions. Certainly we get some wrong all the time, right? But I think I created that confidence because of frankly the firing experience I had to deal with during the time I served in the military, right? So that was very formative on me. And then to the point of resources, it was certainly tough starting out, and it's funny, and we'll get into this more, we're about to commission our new building, right? And it's a significant improvement over where we started. The first office, my partner and I are in, Matt Summer, the gentleman I started the business with, it was literally as big as this table. Right, you can lean over and slap the other guy if you wanted to, and we've grown since that time into we'll be moving into about an 8,500 square foot building, and I think that making that transition was at times tough, but it taught you such good lessons about being resourceful, how to do more with less, how to work through all the books. Again, having good educational experiences and good business experiences helped me do that, but forcing me to do those things. It certainly made me a better business manager, and frankly, more adept, I think, just general, dealing with the highs and lows of running a business as well.
I'd like to know, tell us a little bit more about Tomahawk Robotics, exactly what the services or what you provide to companies or so forth.
Sure. I'll tell you what we do, and I'll give you an analogy to kind of, maybe baseline this for a broader set of an audience. So what we do is we make software that makes robots easier to use, safer, and more effective. So think about what Windows did, 30 years ago in the PC industry, stacking on software to make laptops or PCs at that time much more capable, and make it a tool from, that the entry-level employee could use, mid-level manager, engineering team, or the CEO could use. That whole spectrum is what we're doing for robotic systems today, and we focus not on robots in, let's say, a manufacturing environment, but rather robots that people have to interact with on a regular basis, things that they typically call field robotics. So things used outside, dull, dirty, or dangerous jobs, oil and gas, mining, and certainly the defense industry as well.
Well, that led into my next question then. Who's your customer? Who's your client?
So fortunately, the good news is we have a few. As of, I guess about a quarter ago, we actually have customers on 3 continents, Australia, North America, and Europe. And our customers range from here in the U.S., national labs, defense agencies, both in Europe and Australia, as I talked about, but also large enterprises, people who build robots. Examples of that would be companies like Baker Hughes, from a large oil and gas perspective, but also, again, people who build robotic systems. All right.
I want to get into the deal flow process and talk a little bit about how, because y'all play a very long game in terms of business development, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's very much a long game. We'll get into that in just a moment. If you're watching this episode or listening, this is the Deal Flow Show. You can get more episodes, subscribe, and follow us for additional future episodes at thedealflowshow.com. So again, the Deal Flow Show, and the whole idea of our content is we obviously want to introduce people to great companies, great leaders, operators, but we also are going to share back a lot of this content in a book called Deal Makers, Deal Breakers.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the deal makers for you. When you go into a new environment where you're going to be working potentially with a new strategic partner or a potential client, what's your process of preparation for the deal flow, for the deal process or the deal making process? How do you, my guess is some of that, and I'd like to even get deeper into the background with military, but I'm guessing a lot of what you did there in preparation for a mission, maybe you've carried over, but how do you apply it specifically to the deal making process?
Yeah, so I think with the context of Tomahawk Robotics in place, I think there's really two main two main elements that I start with from an assessment perspective. So number one would be, do we have technology alignment, right? Is there a appropriate technology intersect between our companies? So for instance, we just signed a partnering agreement within the last 30 days with Samsung Electronics, right? Great opportunity for us, huge, one of the top makers of cell phones in the world, by volume, right? So in that, for instance, they have a product, it's called a Samsung Galaxy S20, where we put our software on and you can use that to run robots from, okay? So technology alignment. They have an end user device, we have software, and we put it on that phone to run robots, right? So that's number one. And number two would be, and I'll use a bit of a military term here, but the human terrain. Who's on the other side of the table, right? And this is certainly, I'm sure, no surprise to you that I've gone to this part of the discussion. Do we have somebody who has or shares similar motivations? Do they see the vision of the combined technology in a similar way to us? So those are, my first two, ways to assess things. And certainly, beyond that, after we kind of move through, can I make a deal? Does it make sense from a technology perspective? Next, what are the deal terms, right? Is this a situation where both companies will benefit and it's easy and understandable? Those are the kind of things that I certainly, kind of worked my way through.
How do you bring the people together? Because, we talked about Daniel joining your company. It was very early, in the first 10?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right,
Yep.
First 10 employees. So how do you pinpoint, I was talking, in fact, I kind of did a little bit of a training/article the other day talking about surrounding yourself with people that fill the gaps. But what is your kind of approach to sourcing the right people for the deal process?
Yeah, so I think, certainly from the other side of the table, the people that we work with, I think, what I typically look for is, we do some due diligence ahead, identify, people we want to work with or company targets that are appropriate for us, right? Make contact, and then kind of assess them through, a getting to know you phase, right? And I think that getting to know you phase typically for us is, hey, we're working together, as for instance with Samsung, we were buying product for them before we signed a partnership agreement, and, smooth, kind of a smooth relationship there. They were supportive of us, good terms from, buying products, supporting the products, all those things that you'd want to have in place before leading up to an actual partnering agreement in that, for instance, right? So what you hear from me is, kind of the, let's call it a trial run, right? You have that, get to know you phase that's predicated upon, doing good business together. And I know that's a little bit different because we're talking business to business versus maybe a kind of an investment, take on things, but that's how we work through it.
Well, we don't, and I want to talk about that, the investment side of things in a minute, but we haven't actually had a lot of issuers or capital raise founders in here, and I definitely want to get that take on it because, as you have lived, the CEO of a growing company like this, a lot of your work is making sure, making sure you got money to do what you need to do in the business.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the idea of Tomahawk Robotics, how did it evolve? Was it something that when you were in the military, it started to tick in your mind that this is something that's needed and you could take it to fruition, you could take it to the public now? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think like many early stage technologies, often they when they first kind of debut, they're challenging to use, right? There's a lot of difficulties, impediments to effective use, right?
Sure.
And certainly robotics that I experienced were, reflected that. And so, I think that, gave me the idea of, this technology is going to have a profound impact on the way, people do business, people, serve in the military, how they, keep themselves safe, right? So I think, I saw that, and certainly, thousands of other people saw that, right? So there's nothing unique there. But I really was focused on, and this is, because of, where I served and, the units I served in, ultimately, my hope and my goal with this company is to give people technology so that, reduces risk to, human life, right?
Right.
And so for me, those were the motivations that kind of, propelled me to found Tomahawk Robotics. I think that, those, kind of the challenges of use in a tough environment like Iraq, or the ultimate goal of allowing people to do their job more safely, is what I was going for. Now, I think that that needs to be combined with, those motivations are certainly good, but combining those with the business side of things and frankly the industry exposure that I got subsequent to my time in the military was very important, right? Who are the buyers? How do they buy? What are their really technology problems? How can you insert a technology like I just talked about into the industry with as little friction as possible, right? How do you make a product that actually people can buy and use easily, and that does actually make their end products or their mission better, depending upon the user.
Had you ever had any experience raising capital before, Tomahawk?
No. And it was certainly a learning experience. Yeah.
It's easy, right?
Oh yeah, it's yeah.
I mean, all you got to do is go out there and just ask people to write a check.
That's right. That's right.
We'll get into that in just a minute. This is the Deal Flow Show. I'm JP Maroney, along with our co-host Paul Nicolini. We have a special guest on with us, Brad Truesdell from Tomahawk Robotics. If you're watching or listening to this episode, you can get access to our archives as well as future episodes, and follow us and subscribe at thedealflowshow.com. So let's talk about it. The necessary evil of raising money, I guess, in growing a business. And good products, good companies, good ideas, as long as you're telling the story right, do attract capital. So it doesn't have to be hard or complicated, but it is a process, right?
Oh, yeah.
Can you walk us back to the beginning of how you raised the first seed money? Because we are going to have folks watching these episodes that are in their first venture, first time raising, whether it's friends and family or a first round of capital, all the way up to we've got sponsors and deal makers, broker dealers that are watching. So walk us through that early process that y'all took to get the money in the bank.
Yeah, so we've gone through 2 capital raises thus far, and I'll talk about the first one. I'll focus primarily on that and how things went there. So we bootstrapped the company initially. We wanted to validate the ideas. Hey, can we actually attract customers and all those kind of things, right? Not a novel concept for sure, but we wanted to show a little bit of traction and frankly give our investors confidence that we could deliver on the products that we said we could, right? So for the first roughly 9 months of the company's life, that's where we focused on. And by the time we started raising capital, we had a half dozen customers. And then from that point forward, what I focused on was capital providers here in the Southeast, Florida, primarily in Florida, in the Atlanta area, Georgia, and the reason for that was, certainly there's a significant population down here, but it's not as dense as, for instance, as in Atlanta, right? So those are really the 2 geographies that I focused on. And in that, I went to, small equity providers, venture capitalists, again, regional type venture capitalists here in the Southeast, and wealthy individuals. Today we have a mix of both as part of our cap table. And, what I did was, kind of share my story, the background, the expertise that, both myself and my partner had when we started this company. Again, Matt Summer, by himself, by the way, he's named on nearly 40 patents. So a very accomplished technologist and engineer in his own right. But even then, it was challenging. What we're doing is fairly specialized, number one, and number two, the first money in is always the toughest, right? And I think that we had to work through that process, educate people about where we were focused, the markets that we're in, or generally, I think to something you said, JP, was the we're selling business to business or business to government. That is a long sales cycle, right? And many investors saw that and they were nervous about it, and rightly so, right? Sure. So, how much money would you need? How long would the sales cycle take to actually show, positive traction, right? And so that was one of the reasons why I did want to have some customers at the table already. But this is a very different business than, let's say doing something in consumer space where there's a much more rapid cycle time. But on the flip side of that, we did have some people who saw what we're doing, believed in the capabilities of myself and the co-founder Matt Summer again, and had confidence in what we could do. And I think when we raised capital in 2018, we pulled in about $2.5 million in total, and it allowed us to take our product from what I would call a very nascent or limited feature set state into a much more capable state, over the following 12 or 18 months. And we've continued to build upon that, certainly as we again raise the second round of capital and continue our growth today.
Excellent.
Is the second round ongoing?
No, we completed that in just the tail end of 2019, and the intent there was, at the time we'd scaled from, when I raised capital we were 3 people, and then we scaled up to about 15 people, and now we're just pushing 30, and that second tranche of capital was intended to allow us to hire some additional talent in, so we could meet some contractual commitments that we had on the table. And fortunately, that all turned out well. And today, I think the good news is that our capital burn is extremely small. Generally, we're running about $70,000 in burn per month. And certainly there's variation, and the month before or the last month was about $20,000. So running the business relatively conservatively, right, and scaling up as kind of business opportunities avail themselves, and frankly also because of the economic conditions, the uncertainty associated with COVID, we're probably have more cash in the bank than is probably typical for a company of our where we are in kind of the maturation process.
How has COVID affected you, if at all? Has COVID hurt the?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, I talked about business to business and business to government. A lot of those sales are, face to face.
Right.
Demonstrations, trade shows, getting on planes, going to see somebody, and frankly, giving them confidence in what you have is something that's real. And the inability to do that in many instances has certainly slowed. Slowed our pipeline, right? It hasn't, let's say, caused a drop in our pipeline, but slowed it. So this year we'll triple revenue again this year, which is fabulous. However, I think we could have done more if COVID had not hit for the reasons I just told you. Yeah.
What's the future then? So obviously you've got the burn under a conservative number, as you said, but what is the future like in terms of capital raising for the business, if you can share that? Yeah,
sure, no problem. I think that the good news is the market for robotics is growing significantly. This is absolutely a growth market, and we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us. And I would say this, that I view fundraising, and I will likely execute an additional fundraise in 2021 to scale up to, again, meet a few business opportunities that we have in front of us. And the intent there is that with having, frankly, as you guys know, having some dry powder gives you opportunities to do things maybe a little bit quicker and or grow the business in a way that you could not do necessarily organically, right? So we'll weigh those things out, but there's a strong likelihood I'll do a raise in 2021.
Is again, I'm not sure what all you can speak to, but is the exit be acquired, go public, continue to just grow organically, maybe acquisitions? Yeah. What is the landscape for y'all?
So I think that a couple things here is that the majority of exits in the robotic space have been to strategics of one variety or another. For instance, there's a company called 6 River Systems that recently was sold to Shopify. They're in the robotics, for warehouses. And the guys did great and sold to a growing company, a strategic in the case of Shopify, and did extremely well for themselves and their early investors. And there's been other companies like that. Endeavor was sold in the last 12 or 15 months to FLIR. Again, another situation where a good turn of events for the early investors. I think that those examples and others like them show that, number one, there's a relatively strong appetite among strategics for robotic technologies out there. But that being said, I think as long as we frankly develop a great product, continue to deliver for our customers, we will have plenty of opportunities in that regard. So I think certainly strategics is an option for us. And I think number two would be, is there a path, potentially to an IPO? I'd like to think so. And, I think, I'm rather, rather open to any of those paths as long as it, comes back to the things I talked about. Wanting to create a technology that ultimately makes people doing dull, dirty outdoor jobs, allow them to do it more safely, right? So that's kind of my North Star for how I make those decisions.
Very interesting. Let's go. Can we go back to your background as a SEAL?
Sure.
Any of those? I mean, there's some obvious ones that come to mind for me, but from your gut, the skills and the experience of managing a team, putting things together, things that you've carried over to the deal-making process for yourself?
Yeah, I would say this, that I think that my time in the military, in the SEAL teams, my time overseas, being exposed to a wide range of challenging situations, both from fellow service members, partners that we worked with, whether they be Iraqis or or other coalition partners. You really have to understand the differences people bring to the table and the skill sets that they have, respective to those individuals. And I think seeing that and having an appreciation for that and understanding how to mix them in the right way to get to the ultimate goal that that you're seeking, right? And certainly I made a slew of mistakes along that path, but seeing that and appreciation for different individuals, understanding their strengths and how to put them together, I think that's something that I really brought away from that type of team environment. So I think that's one part of it, and I'd say the second part is, frankly, a very strong, what I'll call mission focus or very success orientation, right? Oftentimes we share the same goals, but we have different routes or different preferences on how to get there, right? And working through people or with people on how to get to that goal and trying to align people and understanding that people will shift from that alignment over time and the patience that goes along with that. I think those are the kind of things. So what you hear me saying is, putting the right team together based upon the skill sets that you have available, understanding the different perspectives that people have along that path, and ultimately, staying focused on the where you want to get to, right? The ultimate goal for the collective group.
Mike Tyson has a quote that he's quoted with.
I know what you're saying.
Well, everybody has a great plan until they get punched in the face, right? So I want to talk about that in just a moment. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the Deal Flow Show, you can get access to our archives as well as future episodes by going to thedealflowshow.com, thedealflowshow.com. Let's talk about the setbacks because, as you mentioned, you said we like to make great decisions. And I believe in a business like yours where you're playing that long game. I want to say that it was maybe who was the GE CEO for so many years?
Immelt?
Or
no, GE. Oh, come on. Help me, guys. Anyway, he said great CEOs, they have the ability to see around the
Jack Welch. There it is.
I believe it was Jack that said your CEOs have the ability to see around the corner. And so when you're playing this long game, you're trying to obviously navigate all of those possible pitfalls and minefields, if you could make the analogy. But when you do hit the wall, when you do make a mistake, or when market forces are at play and beyond your control, you have to reset. How do you as a CEO walk through that mentally as well as tactically?
Yeah, so I'll use an unfortunate example we can all relate to, right, with COVID, right? So, how did we deal with that? What are the actions that we took immediately and then, subsequent to that? And so I think that there's, number one is how do we make sure that, in for instance, the workforce is stable, they're healthy, and they continue to work, at pace. Making sure that they have the resources to work from home in that, for instance, but also, taking some financial steps to make sure, hey, we tighten down on things and get, some more cash, set aside, so we can elongate, our cash burn, right? So tighten up, tighten up our belts, take care of our people, make sure that they're healthy so we can run the business. I think there's also, the mindset, kind of shifting a little bit, and this is whether it's, with, capital raising or with, respective deals with with customers, is that there are, for every 10 deals, one will come through on time and all that kind of stuff, right? So you have to be prepared. You cannot single thread everything, right? So that means, having a primary, secondary, and backup plan all the time. and continue to build up those options for you so that, you move, one thing through the funnel, fabulous. All right, now let's move on to the next thing, and so on and so forth, right? And that has led to, our ability to grow the company from a revenue perspective. It has allowed us to successfully raise equity, as I talked about before, on time, and frankly, do all the things you expect from a business and a well-run business, right? You pay your employees, you pay your creditors, you pay everybody that all your payables, right? And we've done that on time and taken care of our people as a result. So very much a mindset of primary, secondary, and tertiary, and be ready for contingencies. Yeah.
And again, I always try to preface it with you don't have to tell us certain things, but is it all equity for the financing, or do you have a stack, and does debt figure into this long term? Or like, for example, when you have special projects where you said you had to stack up your team to be able to fulfill some of these projects, are these types of things that you can use debt or lines of credit or things like that, as opposed to just financing with equity to continue to maintain your valuation and dilution with your company?
So the answer is yes. I mean, I think, and JP, you certainly know this, the earliest stage companies are appropriate for equity because of the uncertainty of cash flows, right? Sure. And I think now we are moving beyond that, where our cash flows are much more regular, number one, and frankly they can sustain a debt load. So we're moving into that where things like a line of credit or a term from a debt perspective may be appropriate. But preceding this point in time, certainly the majority of outside capital has been equity.
Sure, it's just too unpredictable in those early stages.
Absolutely, and our collateral or lack of collateral is, basically it's labor and laptops for us, right? We don't have any meaningful collateral at this point.
Yeah, those folding tables.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Brad, what kind of people would you like to connect with from our audience or our other guest speakers?
Well, I think that, and I appreciate the question, would be, number one, we are serving a unique market that's atypical for many early stage companies, right? You hear me talking about enterprise, you hear me talking about defense, and that's, investors who are comfortable with that, number one, and number two, investors who are comfortable with the technology, and it's frankly deep technology, right? It's robotics, it's software for those robotic systems. So it's it's very atypical than I think many people will get involved with, right? But if people are willing to take the time to understand what we're doing, they can see the impact on it, number one, and number two, see how sticky it is with customers. We've gone from 5 figures to 6 figures to 7 figures with our customers, and it's because we're delivering great products, and we're off to a good start.
Are y'all doing anything in agriculture?
We are not to date.
Okay.
What about the space industry too?
So, being here on the Space Coast, right? So the way that I would describe our work with government agencies today, and certainly the space industry will absolutely and is using autonomous systems today or robots today. To date, so as a for instance, how many Mars rovers go to Mars, right? It's a handful, right? It's not many. And ultimately, our business is predicated upon selling more and more licenses of our software, right? So when we sell to the government, it is really for those, high volume opportunities that allow us to, again, scale, the volume of product that we sell, vice, a specialized development for a single application like a Mars rover. That's why we have not done anything with the space industry thus far.
Terrific. Would you like to share something about yourself that otherwise the business community or our audience would not know?
Yeah, I'd say that one of the things that I'm very proud of with our business is, I talked about my service in the military. I think alongside that is certainly we've put together a great technical team, but I think I've made a very thoughtful effort to hire veterans, and this is about a third of our company is a veteran of one sort or another, right? Marine Corps, Army, Air Force, or Navy. No Space Force as of yet. And so I am, I'm very pleased about that. And I think that's something that, I am, I want to continue to do, because it, I think we all are collectively understanding of, the last 20 years has been hard on that community, and we want to make sure that as people transition out, they have good professional opportunities. And I'm very pleased about that for that community. But in general, I think, what we've done at Tomahawk Robotics is create high-paying technology jobs that, allow people to lead a good life, and, a good, solid middle-class income. And I'm very proud of that.
A potential future for Steve Carell at Tomahawk Robotics, right? With his new show,
That's right.
Space
That's
Force.
Right.
All right. So how would folks get in touch with you? What would be the best or easiest way that if audience members want to reach out? You can give email address, phone number, web, whatever works.
Yeah, so tomahawkrobotics.com. All one word, tomahawkrobotics.com. And then brad.truesdell@tomahawkrobotics.com is my email. So reach out to me if there's any interest in discussing what we talked about further.
Excellent. Maybe get you on some other shows as well.
Yeah, that'd be
Get
great.
some exposure for the company. Excellent. Once again, this is the Deal Flow Show. And if you're listening or watching this episode, you can get access to future episodes as well as our archives at thedealflowshow.com. Once again, Brad Truesdell from Tomahawk Robotics. Glad to have you on the show. On behalf of my co-host here, Mr. Paul Nicolini, a.k.a. Paulie Walnuts.
You had to say that.
I'm JP Maroney from Harbor City Capital and the Deal Flow Show team. And a special shout out, and we're going to get him up here for a picture in a minute, Mr. Daniel Penaranda, who you hired while he was still in college as an intern, and then migrated as one of your full-time employees until we stole him from you.
That's right.
So, guys, we'll see you again in a future episode of the Deal Flow Show. Take care. Bye-bye.
For more episodes, visit thedealflowshow.com and subscribe.